Do you want to know why social selling is more than just a tool for prospecting, how it can help you build influence, how you can become an influencer in your vertical and close more business? Then keep watching. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Greg Hyer. He is the co-host of the Social Selling Podcast. On today's show, we're diving into why social selling isn't just for top of the end, why it isn't just for prospecting, how it can be used to build rapport, how it can be used to monitor your competitors for trigger events, to uncover new business that you didn't even know existed, and a whole lot more. And so with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Greg, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
No, thank you very much. Well, I appreciate it.
I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to dive into social selling. I think we're going to start with looking at whether social selling is just for prospecting. Then towards the end of the show, hopefully we can dive into some of the misconceptions of social selling. And you can give us your thoughts on how to describe it, but almost the training marketplace, because clearly it's a buzzword. There's a lot of emotion tied to it from different angles. And so I want to unpack some of that and get your thoughts on that, because that'll be fascinating for myself and the audience. But I'm going to tee you up here with a question that I know you've got a lot of knowledge and thoughts and energy behind, and that is social selling purely for prospecting, top of the funnel, or is it more useful than just that?
Oh, it's definitely more useful than just for prospecting. And there's a lot of rhetoric out there about how it is great for prospecting, and this is no joke. It is. It's really great to assist you with even picking up the phone and making a phone call. So, first thing, social selling does not eliminate the phone. We'll clear that out, but we'll go into that a little bit later, I guess. I think that social selling is a way for salespeople to use social or social networks and the data that they get from the social networks in order to create awesome sales engagements, all the way from the beginning when a prospect is completely oblivious to you and your solution, and all the way through past the sale and into when they repeat the buying process and they buy from you again. That's how I see social selling.
Give us an example of this, Greg, because I'm sure the audience, they understand that, and we can talk about the phone for sure, but before we pick up the phone, we want, if possible, it not to be a cold call. We want the person we're calling to know, like, and trust us the best that they can through social media, through email, through meeting them at a conference, through getting an introduction or a referral, whatever the means, and using essentially whatever means necessary to make that happen. But how, in fact, let's just stop on this for a second and we can come on to examples further down the funnel in a minute. But is there any misconceptions with this and the phone and the peak? So this is what I'm intrigued as. When you're involved in the training process and being more practical, even more one-on-one than what I am with my audience, do people seriously believe that you just don't need to use the phone if you've got an amazing skill level and amazing following on Twitter?
There is a misconception among some salespeople that they don't need to use the phone. They don't need to use it for prospecting. They still kind of need to use it. They do need to use it throughout the sales engagement, of course. It's easier than driving up to someone's office and knocking on the door, say, hey, let's have an impromptu meeting. There are some salespeople out there who definitely do replace cold calling with social selling, but the ones that are really effective at using social for sales are the ones who can combine multiple tools like the phone and using cold calling techniques to create a contextual conversation to be able to and hopefully nurture that relationship and move it forward to a sale.
And let's get super real here for the audience. Is this that salespeople are trying to avoid using the phone because they don't want to use the phone? Or and this might be 50-50, or is this sales trainers are pitching and positioning themselves that, hey, I can eliminate the phone from your workflow to make things easier by social selling?
I haven't met too many sales trainers that are saying you don't need to use the phone anymore. I think some of them are very much saying that you can create and create a better conversation prior to you picking up the phone if you do use the data that you're able to gather from social. And I think that's the direction I believe most trainers are going towards. There are some out there that just don't have a clue, unfortunately, and they're saying, oh no, you could just send LinkedIn InMail or send direct messages on Twitter, or hope that your content that you're pushing out there is going to be able to take and bring somebody in, hook somebody in, so that way you can start the conversation on a social network. Of course, yes, that's possible, but that's a lot of work, and that's a lot to expect from a social network.
But isn't this slightly backwards in that you always want to get them on the phone anyway? So would you not want to get them in the phone higher up the funnel so that you are in control of the conversation somewhat, you can qualify them and be somewhat selfish about it and see if they're a great customer, versus just having this mound of inbound leads that you're trying to get on the phone with them later and later and later for whatever reason, whether it's just being lazy, whether it's me. When I first got into sales, I hated being on the phone with anyone, but I was more than happy to drive to a hospital theatre and sell a surgeon in person. I hated speaking to them on the phone, and it was something I had to just get over through nothing but just gritting my teeth and getting on with it for long enough that it didn't bother me anymore. So isn't the goal to get them on the phone? And so we're kind of beating around the bush by trying to avoid that moment. People
are very much afraid of rejection. The best salespeople can kind of figure it out and brush it off their shoulder and move forward. But I think, going back to what you were saying before about getting folks into the process much earlier, yes, it would be best to get somebody on the phone. But I think the salesperson needs to be better prepared. And I think the data that you get from social actually helps prepare a salesperson to create a better conversation. So rather than taking and reading from the script that sales management may give to you, you are able to have a much better conversation about maybe a recent update that someone had posted on LinkedIn, or someone had tweeted out, or maybe they were part of a Twitter chat, and something they said really struck a chord with you, and found an opening to have that conversation. Yes, you do want to get into the buyer's journey much earlier, but because the buying process has changed so much since social has kind of gotten crazy in 2008, 2009, that the buyer is in control of the entire buying process for the most part, and it's up to sales to get into the process earlier and help the prospect navigate through the buying process all the way through the sale and beyond. So that way, they can come back through and buy again. If you're a salesperson that sells a suite of products, then you definitely want to continue to nurture that relationship. So that way, you can get them back into the buying process again, and it makes it easier to sell, of course. When you can sell a customer again and again and again.
So it seems like we go past the step of prospecting. We've covered that on the show before, so I don't think we need to dive too deep into the weeds there. But the next step, it seems like we've had that discovery call. We are now trying to build that know, like, and trust. Is social used in this context now to find opportunities to build rapport and to deepen relationships? Is that what we should be using it in kind of phase 2 as we continue to learn more about the prospect and align them potentially with our products?
Sure, and not just on a personal basis. I mean, if someone, they may post about what they did over the weekend. Sure, that might be a great way to open a conversation when you call them again. But you're also going to be watching for their updates, and are they chatting with competition? Are they having conversations among their colleagues? Are they doing anything in addition to take and bring and help you move that conversation forward? What else are they discussing online? Because that's what a lot of B2B buyers in particular do, is they want to go online, and they're either, they could be reading reviews, they could be joining in on Twitter chats, they could be having conversations in LinkedIn groups, if they're still using LinkedIn groups, then they could be just doing status updates. So, hopefully at that point, you've kind of married them on social. You connected with them on LinkedIn, maybe not Facebook, but maybe you found a group that they're in that you joined as well. You're following them on Twitter, they followed you back. There's I guess, I don't know if crossing is kind of big over in the EU or in Germany or over there, but you've connected with them on social so that we're able to take and monitor their conversation. Hopefully, also you're using some sort of tool to help with picking up those conversations and alerting you, because you are a salesperson, you are working on other opportunities as well.
So we'll come on to tools in a minute, because I'm sure you can give us a list of 3, 4, 5 that'd be really useful for the audience. And a lot of these are still new for me as well, because I get, how to describe it? I get the brand new companies want me to try their products, so I kind of get behind the scenes, and there's typically I have to sign NDAs, and I'm giving informal advice to them. Then you've got them, clearly got like LinkedIn, you've got all the big prospecting platforms. But then there's a gap in the middle, which experts like you always come on the show and provide 2 or 3 that I've never heard of that end up being really useful. So I will dive into that in a second. But I just wanted to, again, drill down and get clarity here of, again, this might be a misconception about social selling, that we're not particularly looking for John walked his dog down at the beach at the weekend. Are we looking more for essentially B2B trigger events? We're looking for this person is now spoken to this person, or this person's left, or we're looking for, maybe we don't get the full conversation because we're not, hacking into people's email accounts and scrolling through their emails, which would clearly be an illegal but great tool to have. And we're perhaps looking for the trails of these conversations of them connecting with our competitors on LinkedIn and things like that. Is that where the focus should be after this initial rapport building step?
Yeah, yes, it should be, who else are they having conversations with? Maybe, most time buyers don't like to disclose who they are having conversations with. Sometimes they will. I mean, if you have great rapport with the customer, then, or someone's going to say, someone on the buying committee, if there's multiple folks involved in the buying process, they may just, say, oh, hey, we're also considering, this vendor, this vendor, this vendor. And, you're like, oh, wow, there's a new one. I didn't know there was another competitor in the market. So you do want to take and use those opportunities to figure out who they are, who you're competing against, because you're not just competing against the buyer saying no, you're also competing against all the other competition who's trying to get their business too. And this is not different from your traditional sales process, where you have a rebuttal for why that why that competitor is not the right choice, or how you do it better than them. We're just able to access that information. There's a better opportunity to access that information from social, especially if they're out there, if they followed a sales rep, if they've a competitive sales rep, if they've followed the company page on LinkedIn, if they've following them on Twitter, whatever the case may be. There's those signals that says, we're in a competitive situation. Here's how we can move forward with the conversation and kind of guide that buyer through the process.
Turning this on its head slightly for a second, because I've never really thought about this, and if there's a tool to do it as opposed to us doing it proactively ourselves, it would be seemingly a really good solution to seeing what the competition are doing. But should we be following our competitors? For me, locally in medical device sales, there's only 2 or 3 reps that I was really competing with. So should I be following them on LinkedIn, even subtly? I don't know how you'd go about doing it without them paying attention to you. And following them on Twitter, following them on social, and trying to not, how to describe it? Because there's a not ethics, but there's a you don't want to look super slimy by trying to just jump in and steal people's business when there's a deal kind of like brewing, but you want to position yourself there to be the top of mind when those decisions are being made, if that makes sense. And what I'm getting at, there's a dog eat dog element to this of, I will go and take someone else's business if I feel my product is better suited for the customer than what theirs is. But I also don't want to spend every morning following Barry, the medical device salesperson who lives down the road, and tracking where his car is, or tracking where he's checking into on Foursquare and things like that. So there's obviously a line here. But is that a useful group of data or a series of data that we should be proactively as sales professionals, or even as a company as a whole, tracking and making note of, so that we can find opportunities that we didn't know existed because they just happen to be in the deal before we are?
I know a salesperson is probably just listening to that and saying, "Oh my God, this can be so much work." I can barely follow my prospects, let alone a competitive sales rep. But I think that, if as you develop in sales and you stay in this profession, you become more and more professional and more skilled at what you do in sales, you'll start to make the connections with the competition, right? Because you need to. You need to know who your competition is, exactly who the salesperson is. So that way you can take and walk into a sales engagement and understand how to compete in that. So if that means connecting with them, you met at a conference, you connect with them later on LinkedIn, they accept it, perfect. You got access to their, to their network. You got, if they have the feature turned on in their privacy settings, you can follow them on Twitter. I mean, you don't even have to on Twitter. I mean, You don't even have to follow using your actual account. Create another account and follow them.
That's what I was trying to avoid to say, Greg, because I know there's a whole bunch of people now who are going to set up profiles with really attractive people, make them sound like a potential prospect, and then stalk the heck out the competition. So is there a tool that can take some of this load off, or is it, as you described, just experience over time enables you to spend the correct amount of time doing these seemingly extra tasks on top of everything else that you're doing?
I don't recommend necessarily going and creating another account, but you could, and there are salespeople who do that. An alternative to that would create a private list on Twitter of your competitors, because there you don't have to follow them, but that you can maintain those updates or at least continue to get those updates within your account. So there's an alternative to creating a brand new account and trying to dupe a salesperson into thinking you're a prospect. So you're going to be able to take this information over time and become a better salesperson because of it. If a prospect was to see that you're connected with other folks within the industry, they're probably going to look at you and have a degree of respect for you, because you have a degree of insight that maybe other sales reps may not have. And I think that's the main thing that you want to pull out of this, is that you're not only going and connecting with potential prospects and your customers, but you're also connecting with other folks in the industry. And they're going to come to you, they're going to see you as that expert in the industry and provide them with the insight that they need in order to make an informed decision. Could that perspective be a little biased? Yes, but I think that the prospect is going to be somewhat aware of that. But I think if you build trust with them and are completely honest, and which I believe most salespeople are honest to an extent. They want to do what's best for their customers, especially nowadays with social, because someone could write a bad review and it's out there and your name is in it, and it's that creates havoc. So there's a degree of accountability now with social that makes sales reps a little bit more reputable, I think. So
you've touched on something here which is seemingly controversial, especially with the people who come on the show. At one point, perhaps last year, it was perhaps 50-50, and now it's perhaps shifting more towards the side that salespeople should become, I use this term very lightly, but mini thought leaders within the vertical. And for context of that, me and medical devices, it would be me being known, liked, and trusted by the urologists in Yorkshire. So 40, 50 dudes, and probably about 4 women. There's not many female urologists. So when I say mini thought leader, it would be that at a conference, they come and find me because they want to speak to me. It would be that I'd be putting on training for these individuals and taking them away and doing things that the organization that I worked for last enabled me to do. But I did it all very specifically to increase my personal brand and leverage that within those people, that I was the person who knew more about the products than anyone else, that couldn't necessarily get them a better deal than other people, but would get them a fair deal. And the product knowledge came because I worked from the biggest player in the endoscopy space, and I moved to their biggest competitor. So I had kind of branches on both sides as far as product knowledge and corporate internal knowledge and all that good stuff. So I'm kind of overemphasizing this because I wanted to get a real clear answer from you on this, Greg, and this is really important for the audience. Should salespeople be using social media, building their presence online, and using social selling to become, as I described, a mini influencer within their space? Or is their time better spent, getting on the phone and actually selling?
There is a lot of discussion about how salespeople need to become mini marketers. And and I think what people really mean to say by that is that there needs to be better alignment between sales and marketing. Marketing's role has changed in supporting sales quite a bit over the last 10 years. And it has become by developing content and identifying opportunities on social and recommending social networks to go on and doing the research and doing the things at 30,000 feet the sales reps just don't do. I see salespeople as that ground trooper basically that's in the trenches, that's dealing with folks one-on-one, that needs to create that conversation at that individual level to basically move that conversation forward. But do they need to be creating their own content? No, I would say well, it depends. Should they be creating white papers? No. So should they be providing insight to marketing on a great case study to create? Yes. They should be turning to the colleagues to be able to take and put that together in the brand's image. So that way they can go back and use it again to create better context and better conversations going forward. Let marketing take and analyze how effective that content is. And so that way they can say, this content is working and this isn't. You gave an example of, in medical sales, of creating a really nice network and kind of being that influencer within it. I think there's a difference between a thought leader and an influencer. Usually, thought leaders are creating brand new ideas and new concepts and things like that. Now, if your company is creating new products and you're influencing that, then sure, maybe you might be a thought leader in that sense. But I think what we're asking sales reps to do is to take their experience and sell better with their experience by creating better relationships. Salespeople need to be really, really, really good at creating relationships. And thought leaders don't need to create relationships; they need to create audiences. So there's a key difference between those. So CEB, which is the Corporate Executive Board, they recently, I think it was last year, they wrote the book, The Challenger Customer. And they really did kind of explain the main difference between what a thought leader is and what a sales rep should be, which is providing commercial insights. And I really subscribe to that, to the research that they put together with their book. I read the book. We're actually going to have one of the authors on the podcast in a few weeks. And we're going to talk with him and get more and more of this out of him about how salespeople can be better at providing insight to their customers.
I think you've cleared up a whole bunch here, and I'm going to ask you a slightly deeper question. But just for clarification, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm scribbling notes down as we go through this. So salespeople shouldn't become thought leaders. Thought leaders are people who are bringing brand new insights or technology into a space. They should become, for want of a better word, influencers, who are people who have great relationships, not necessarily massive audiences. So we're talking about people who have two-way relationships versus someone like me who perhaps has more of a push relationship to my audience. Clearly, hundreds of thousands of people tuning in every kind of week. It's very difficult for me to go one-on-one with them all and know kind of who their partner is, where they live, and what kind of cars they're into. So is that the definition here, that the split that we should be aiming for? We're aiming for influencer status, which is people know, like, and trust us, and they have a two-way relationship with us within that space.
That's exactly right.
Cool. So next question is, how the heck do we get to that position? Because I think if we're conscious now that we're narrowing it down, not that we need 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. Perhaps we need 100 of the correct connections on LinkedIn. How do we go from someone who we've connected with to someone who has influence, who has that know, like, and trust? Perhaps even before we've done the deal and then after we've done the deal as well.
You don't need to be on LinkedIn to aim to get as many connections as possible, but that's not something that's such a bad thing as well. There are sales managers out there who will probably say, hey, how are you connecting with folks on, are you over 500 connections? What's your connection number at? This could be a KPI that the sales managers are measuring their sales reps on. So do we tell sales reps now to go back and eliminate everyone in their network that isn't a potential prospect or someone who could potentially buy from them? Absolutely not, because you are, while you're trying to create influence within your network, you are also building your brand at the same time, not as a thought leader, but one who has the answers and who has the experience to be able to take and help somebody through the process, at least evaluate whether or not they're the right customer for your solution. So connecting with folks, I would say still connect with new folks on LinkedIn or new followers, or gather new followers on Twitter and follow back as well. So I would say continue to do that. Remind me what the second point of your question.
Just how we build this, because there's multiple elements to this. So I appreciate you kind of pulling me up on it. Obviously I didn't ask it the question clear enough, because I'm processing this as we go through as well, Greg. Because there's an element of personal branding, which I'm assuming and guessing we want to align ourselves with the personal brand of this person is in this, so the people know these facts about us. This individual is in this industry and they can solve these problems. That's the personal brand element of it. And what I want to know from there, because you can almost say those things and people believe it until they test it, and then they've got evidence either way. So you can say I am the expert in medical devices, in urology. I fix problems of endoscopes being broken, mal kind of like managed, and screen issues or whatever you kind of want to go into the technology side of things. And I think that's something that we should almost have a personal statement that allows people to talk about us with those things in place. But moving on to the implementing this, it was, again, do we need 100 great connections on? I'll draw this down even further, and I'll give context of what I do with the show. So I have an email list, tens and tens of thousands of people. There's two email lists. One's got 70-odd thousand people on. One's got about 30,000 people on. I have pretty much given up on the one with 70,000 people because I didn't have any engagement with them, and I didn't make it an effort to have engagement with them. Whereas what I'm doing now on the smaller one is the first email says, hey, email me, reply with your biggest problem in sales. And I get 40, 50 of these emails a day, and I try the best I can. It sometimes takes a week or two, depending on what I've got on with recording and other things. But I go through each one of these. I have a conversation. We end up, talking about things nothing to do with sales. It's people typically ask me what the hell the GTR on the table symbolizes and what's that for. And I then tie them in with the narrative of the podcast and what we're trying to do with it. And those people are way more likely to share the show. They're way more likely to care about it, to listen over the long term, versus someone who signs up to the email list, consumes all the content, and then goes, well, I'm off to the next thing now, a month later. So what for me to do all that is great, because that's my job. I do this full time. I get paid on the number of people that download the episodes for the sponsors. And so it's worth my time to grow the audience, and it's slow and it's organic, but to grow the audience from that perspective. What I want to get at, Greg, is for the salesperson who has the sales manager saying, you need to make more cold calls. For the, they get home from work and they don't want to spend 4 hours on LinkedIn because they've got 2 kids running around that they want to spend time with. What is the best and highest leverage point to build the status as an influencer? And it might not even be online. We might come back to just shaking hands at industry events. But what's the biggest leverage point that they've got to make an impact with all of this?
So it would be by building their network on the different social platforms, by connecting with other folks as well. So I have a slight background in email marketing, so I hear what you're saying on focusing on a particular segment of your list, and the ones that are most engaged with it, and trying to get information out of them as well. But there's also the person that might be subscribed to your email list that only engages once a year, right? And that one time a year, they actually might be buying something from you. So there's an abundance of opportunity out there. And I think we're a little quick sometimes to cut things out and say, you know what, I'm not going to talk to you anymore because you're not really interested. You're not showing any engagement. But there could be, whether it is a year or 2 years down the road, you're building yourself as a professional. This isn't a short-term game, right? So this is something that sales is a nurturing process. Some people require a lot more nurturement and time to take and develop as a potential customer. You need to continue to stay in touch with them. I mean, they may be working. To give you an example, say you're connected with 1,000 people on LinkedIn. You've sold to 50 of them so far. So the other 950, they may not be in the right position from an occupational standpoint to be able to purchase a solution that you offer. But maybe somewhere down the road, when they change a job, they start their own company, whatever it may be, they could be able to make that purchase from you. They may have a reason to make that purchase from you. But in the same time, or during that time frame, they're learning more about you. They're like, I really would love to buy from Will. I think he's got a great solution. But it's just now is not the right time. But what I'll do is that if somebody has a need for it, then I'll pass his name along and I'll give you that referral, whether it's on social or it's in a person meeting or something along those lines. So there is that networking effect that we have to continue to think about, and it's much bigger. There's a lot more legs to this than then a lot of people, that are seeking instant gratification from social, there's a lot more legs to this than we realize.
I love it. You used the correct word there, and you've summed up the conversation so far perfectly with your building, in that and this is where I think other social sales trainers and authors and people have got this wrong of, and which is where we start the show of. You're using the platforms to funnel people into the funnel that you've used for many years beforehand, and clearly there's data to that. Sales management want a predictable kind of revenue model, but you, being selfish as a sales professional, you're putting in work now with people that might not pay off for another 12 months. But that next deal, when that 12-month time comes up, when that person comes to you, they're going to come just to you. You're going to be top of mind. It's going to be everyone against you because they've consumed, I use content loosely, but they've consumed the content that you've curated or shared or however you want to put it. And you've got that know, like, and trust in place. So sales just gets easier. I use the example all the time of, in my last role, there was one chap, he was getting on a bit, but he'd been selling to the surgeons to the point of, and training surgeons with the gear at different events. So he was training the trainees who are now, full surgeons who have the ability to have that buying power. And so he would walk into a room, start telling stories about all these surgeons of when they were 25, and they would be seeing, really debauched tales about prostitutes and getting drunk and going all these nights out and going down to London. And, obviously it was tactile how and when and who he was sharing it with. But he had such a good relationship with these surgeons that they would just literally give him money. He would walk in the room, and so he worked as almost as ambassador for the brand. And so I'd bring him onto my patch as many times as I could throughout the year, because everyone was fighting over his time. And he would literally come on, and I would win a whole load of business 2 weeks later on the back of his personal brand, on his relationships that he had. And again, these two-way relationships that he'd built over the long term. So I think that was the perfect way to wrap that part of the show up there, Greg, of it's building something. It's not using a platform to make an ask. It's building something over the long term, right?
Yeah, exactly. Matter of fact, there's in our social selling training that we offer, we have 4 different quadrants that we'd like to focus on, and they're called building social capital, improving social proximity, improving social engagement, and then using social listening to power all of that. So these 4 quadrants are really what we're asking salespeople to really understand when it comes to social, because with social capital, you're building your brand, your credibility as an individual. So that way, as time goes on, as you build your capital through being consistent, yes, sharing content, but making connections, building your network, you're going to be able to take and return that, or so you'll get a return out of that capital that you're investing in. And with social proximity, we are building our network so that way we can get closer to the opportunities. With social listening, we're out there listening to the problems that the market has, and identifying opportunities to help people and engage with them. And then social engagement, of course, and that's creating that routine, that consistent routine of how we engage on social, using the proper ethics and the proper way to drive engagement. So one thing, if there's a whole bunch of people that are listening to this podcast right now, I'm going to tell you right now, if your sales manager tells you to send the first follow-up email with a pitch inside of it, tell them no. And you're not doing that anymore. The strategy sucks, and just say, I'm not doing it anymore. We're building relationships.
Love it. All right, just before we wrap up, Greg, I want to ask you a question on the future of social selling, just selling in general as kind of social. That word over time will probably get dropped, and there'll be something else that'll be replaced with it, and this will just be common knowledge and common process of people. But using the term social selling just for kind of to box things up here, how is social selling going to change over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years?
Sure. So we had some conversations recently on the podcast with some creators of tools that use AI or artificial intelligence and other things like machine learning and natural language processing. And what this is kind of resembling is back when social selling was kind of catching on. LinkedIn really attached itself to the name social selling, and how we used social to improve engagements. I'm seeing more of this conversation started to bubble up again, but around AI. So we had we had Sabrina from Curious.io on a couple episodes ago, and she talked about how now they're able to take and do call shadowing for B player sales reps, where they're actually able to come in, listen to the conversations, apply machine learning to the A player conversations, and then develop playbooks to guide an up and rising and onboarding sales rep through the buying process, or through the conversations that they're having with prospects. Really, really great tool for inside sales. We're also Crystal knows. Folks out of Nashville, Tennessee, Drew D'Agostino, he actually has a great solution out there for being able to take and determine how you should create an email based on the social post that a prospect is actually shared out there. So what is their personality? What, should you be getting to the point, or do they like to beat around the bush? These sort of conversations. So I'm seeing AI finally coming into the sales space to be able to help assist a better conversation and create a better engagement. Because the one thing that prospects really dislike is when, they're just given the script. And I think this is what changes. This is what's going to finally change us from going to the script, or coming off the script and going into creating these playbook conversations that are just smarter, much smarter. I could tell you from personal experience and actually being on the marketing side, I was at a startup and we were using marketing automation to be able to take and figure out kind of, score folks, right? Where are they in the buying process? And when somebody got a high enough score, we send it over to the sales development rep to qualify. But what the sales development rep would not do is look at the data and look at what pages were they engaging with on the website. Were they engaging with us on social? Was there anything? No, they were just going straight to the script or reading the script because they were tasked with completing 60 to 100 phone calls a day because sales and marketing sometimes likes to treat it like a numbers game. And sure, it is, but it's such a waste of time and resources that we can use things like AI now to be able to take and create better conversations and hopefully a customer that stays longer and buys more products from us down the road.
Makes total sense. I'm excited for all of this. Perhaps we can talk about it off there, but I had signed an NDA before I went into it. But there was this tool that was essentially giving real-time feedback on a call, essentially to your ear as you are having the conversation of, well, I don't know what I can and can't talk about, but essentially like eject from the conversation was one key point of it, of everyone's happy, you've done the objective, things are moving forward, they don't want to hear about your cat, stop talking and like hang up and be respectful of their time is the point, like joking aside. But that's going to change things dramatically when you've got then, it's almost like having the devil and angel on your shoulder of, do you listen to what the data's saying? Do you use what your gut is telling you about the scenario? It's going to be a really interesting dynamic there. And
it certainly is.
And I imagine this will go even further of, it'll be when you're in a bar trying to chat with women, it'll be when you're doing, but there's so many, clearly it'll be B2B sales. There's a huge potential to make a margin here, but for huge companies, but this will trickle down into other places, I'm sure. It'll be on the podcast. It'll be me going now. It'll be going, Will, you're rabbiting on with this question, wrap up the show. And it'll be they're going on all the audience listening data. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be a weird world at that point because there's going to be opportunities for people to do the total opposite and probably have success there as well, just because it's different. But with that, Greg, because I could talk to you about AI and the future of this for hours moving forward, but I've got one question to ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
That's a good question. I think the one thing I would say is just continue to work on being consistent over time, and continue to work on nurturing those relationships. That's probably what I would go back and tell myself, that the consistency is probably the most important thing. If the internet never happened, if social never happened or anything like that, then I would say just maintaining consistent contact and producing consistent content. That would be what I would advise myself.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, you've hinted at us. Tell us a little bit more about the podcast, where we can find it, and then where we can find out more about you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I co-host the Social Selling Podcast with Martin Brossman and Elise Archer over at Linking Into Sales. You can actually find it on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and a number of other platforms as well. We try to record a couple episodes a month, so you can watch the video on YouTube as well. I am on LinkedIn. You can find me at Greg Hyer, last name spelled Hyer. You're welcome to send me an invite to connect if you'd like. I'm also on Twitter at Greg Hyer, and if you just search, you'll find me. I try to make sure I own my name. There's a few other folks out there called Greg Hyer. There's this guy in the Naval Academy here in the U.S., and he's a pretty good in sports right now. So I'm kind of competing with him a little bit, but it's all good. So
nice. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. I am, not really competing anymore, but when I first started, there's a Will Barron spelt the same with 2 R's in Barron, who lives about an hour's down from me from Sheffield, and he's a designer. And I think he owns willbarron.com, so that was slightly annoying to not be able to get that domain. But I feel your pain here, Greg, of battling over images and Google search rankings. And this is something that, this is a conversation for another time completely, but this is something that salespeople should be conscious of as well, of if a prospect is Googling you and there is a male stripper that's got the same name who's at the top of the search results, well, that may be, depending on what they look like, that might be a good or a bad thing. I'm not sure. But this is something that certainly the audience should be focused on. And with that, Greg, I want to thank you for your time, your insights on this. I want to thank you for going back and forth and not necessarily being controversial, but giving your true thoughts and insights on social selling as a whole, because there was a lot to go out with this one. So I appreciate that, mate. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with the audience. Thank you.